Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. for our St. Nicholas Day show. Now, it's in perspective, right? We've had Ferguson with Michael Brown. We have this monstrous homicide, murder of Eric Garner on Staten Island. Remember, Staten Island is an island of reactionaries. New York has a middle class. It has some ultra-lefts. But if you're a reactionary, you go to Staten Island, and I'm afraid that's what we're seeing, among other things. Bad news. So there is a problem which cannot be solved by economic means alone. It will require a direct ideological campaign, and it will require getting some of these district attorneys out and replacing them with people who have a better sense of what we need for governance. In other words, the logic about indicting Darren Wilson was indict him for a charge, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, for the sake of public order, to keep order in the streets. That's a consideration. Statesmen would have to look at that. And in the case of Eric Garner, it's open and shut case. Indict that guy for something more serious, murder one, murder two, whatever it is, because that's what you see, and otherwise you're going to get all kinds of disorder. But the main thing here we have to consider is, under these conditions of economic breakdown, these protests on the Ferguson and Staten Island, and the case of this 12-year-old boy simply murdered for having a toy gun, these can detonate the mass strike. The mass strike can go off at any time, and we've got to be ready for it. So it means economic demands, the 5 to 10 million new jobs for young people, perhaps temporary, quite a few of them on the WPA federal budget. Yes, fine. And also then the tariff, as Daniela was saying. Here in Washington, D.C., I have to say we're having the final farewell to the former mayor, Marion Barry, and I would like to sum up what quite a number of people remember about him. And this is actually it's quite significant that it works this way. We have lots and lots of people quoted in the Washington Post today saying that the first job they ever had, the first time they ever got a paycheck and considered themselves integrated into society, was under Mayor Barry, because he would get you a job. So here we have the casket of the late mayor and city council member, been in government for 40 to 50 years, hated by the Washington Post, hated by Katharine Graham. It's, of course, a sad day, but Petula Dvorak writes, the first in a long line of thankful Washingtonians. So these are people who remember. They say, when I was younger, I got my first job thanks to Marion Barry. Not the free market, no free market. They worked as groundskeepers, department counselors, youth leadership organizers, crossing guards, and nurses. Marion Barry gave them those jobs. That's what you will hear almost any time you talk to native Washingtonians of a certain age. Marion Barry gave me my first summer job. And that was a paycheck, but it was also responsibility, trust, pride, where none had been there. So, I did newspaper delivery, but Marion Barry gave me my first real job as a groundskeeper. And the other interesting thing we find is, what was one of the last things Marion Barry did on earth? The Reverend Jim Dickerson, executive director of affordable housing called MANA, recalled hosting one of Barry's last public events, a ribbon cutting for a 24-unit apartment complex in Anacostia. That's the southeast part of the district, beyond the branch of the Potomac that goes off in that other direction. It's a ribbon cutting for a 24-unit apartment complex in Anacostia, built with city subsidies and affordable for people with incomes of $30,000 or less. He started all of these programs that we continue to build on. So all of these different things, and not all in the public sector. Here we have a woman says she was 14 years old when Barry's youth leadership program plucked her from a paper route and planted her at the Harriet Tubman Quad at Howard University one summer. And now the summing up of all. As Barry's casket is carried in, and he'll be lying in state at the district building and then the memorial service on St. Nicholas's Day. One viewer says, I said a small prayer to thank him for his life and may his legacy be blessed. Now look at that despicable U.S. ruling class. How many of them could qualify for something like that, right? For this gratitude, which is actually overwhelming in the black community, but not only. Here in Washington, D.C. And if you were a hedge fund hyena, if you were a zombie banker, if you were a locust fund attacking Argentina, hang your head in shame. This is the kind of political leadership we need. And, of course, the Department of Justice set up a Get Barry test. They successfully entrapped him. He had weaknesses for women and for narcotics. Terrible. But a lot of people then said this is somebody who looks sort of like me. It's obviously better not to do that stuff. But then when he got out of jail, he was reelected the mayor, things that are often forgotten. So I also want to just mention again that when there was a program on one of the local television stations affiliated with one of the three main broadcast networks, I was the guy, I was probably the only white guy standing up for Marion Barry, and I'm very glad I did. And I talked about Gestapo tactics here in Washington, D.C., and obviously the fact it was a coup d'etat by the FBI, by the Department of Justice, when they successfully entrapped him. So I think that's a very interesting commentary. We need somebody, and a movement that will put that stuff on the agenda, right? No jobs, no peace. No jobs, no peace. That's the heart of the matter. Obviously, in the short run, these individual cases are tragic, and many people can relate to them. But then the task of leadership, right? The thing we're seeing right now is there's a vacuum of leadership. Some forces have got to get in there and say, we want those jobs paid for by Wall Street, not paid for by borrowing from China, not paid for by taxing anybody. Wall Street must pay. And that's how we'll solve these questions as the United States goes forward. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. The question now of Syria and Turkey, once again, from a slightly different point of view. In the past week, we have had Iran bombing the ISIS terrorists. And I think civilization, humanity, owes a vote of thanks to Iran. Iran says, you terrorists, don't get within 25 miles of our border or we'll blow you to kingdom come. And that's undoubtedly a plus. I think this ought to lead to some people rethinking their sort of Pavlovian anti-militarist reactions. I'm afraid sometimes you do have to do this stuff. Hitler was one. This seems to be another one. So Iran has bombed ISIS in Iraq, and Syria, the Syrian Arab Army Air Force, is bombing ISIS in the region of Kobane. So essentially, whether you like it or not, it's a united front of the United States with Iran and with Syria against ISIS. That is reality. And whether the humanitarian bombers, the Susan Rice people, or the Samantha Power people if they don't like that, that's too bad for them. Assad has also said that the U.S. attacks are not effective, right? So he's needling the U.S. Why don't you do more? Indeed, why don't you do more? 1,000 airstrikes over a period of 4 to 6 or 8 weeks? That's totally inadequate. And the other big thing now, the hand that held the dagger has plunged it into the back of its neighbor. And that's Erdogan once again. Last weekend in the neighborhood of Kobane, we have very well documented photographed, filmed event in which the Turkish army, under the orders of Erdogan and Davutoglu, allows ISIS killers to come onto Turkish territory to start attacking the Kurds in Kobane. And this is another outrage, and this Erdogan has gone too far. He will have to be called to account. This cannot coexist with NATO or anything else. And his spouting this stuff about how the West doesn't understand the Middle East, but apparently he does. No, I'm sorry, you don't, because you're supporting ISIS. The Kurds, of course, called attention to this. You found it on the Twitter feed of Tarpley, Webster G. Tarpley. The problem was, as the Kurds said, previously they'd been surrounded on three sides, right? East, west, and south. But now, thanks to Erdogan, they can also be surrounded on the north with terrorist ISIS crazies, killers, butchers operating from Turkish territory. So this cannot be allowed. Now, the Turkish government denies it. That's ridiculous. There's also a question about is it possible to negotiate for terrorists, with terrorists, to try to get their kidnapped victims out. But the first problem, as we've pointed out with all these cases, is the people that are in the control of ISIS got there on their own, right? Who, in God's name, told you to go there and minister to the needs of the Free Syrian Army, the Nusra Brigade, Al-Qaeda, or ISIS? People who get themselves into these predicaments, I think it would be time for the State Department to escalate its warning. Don't go there, dear Americans. However, once they're in custody, I would just cite the advice of Cardinal Richelieu, one of my all-time favorites. Cardinal Richelieu has a very interesting paragraph, and it's very meaty and to the point. And he says, I always recommend negotiating with everybody all the time. He says, I negotiate with them, whether there's hope for a settlement or no hope, that doesn't matter to me. I always learn more. I'm always stronger and better if I keep negotiating with those people. So I would negotiate with anybody. I would not be afraid, right? Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. That would be the summary on that one. And then we also have Mubarak. Mubarak not guilty. The Thermidor, according to some, has now arrived for this idiotic farce of the Arab Spring. There never was revolution, people. I put out the criteria at the time. Revolution means abolish slavery, break a foreign protectorate, as Nasser did in the 50s, overthrow a monarchy, tremendous, deep economic reforms like the New Deal, and again, abolish slavery certainly counts. There never was a Tahrir revolution. That was a petty bourgeois pipe dream of petty bourgeois showboaters and ego trippers. It never happened. And Mubarak, it's not clear to me how you're going to put Mubarak in the pillory. The point is that under Mubarak there was some recognizable form of civilization, right? You can call it a dictatorship, sure, a military dictatorship. But is that the worst? Look over in Libya and you'll see something that's much, much worse. So Mubarak is obviously at the end of his career. But when it comes to General Sisi, I would say to people, especially the ultra-lefts, mushheads, left liberals and others, open your eyes to the fact that Sisi has been the salvation of Egypt, which is why U.S. Ambassador Patterson, who's now been promoted to Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East, and others have tried to destabilize Egypt with the help of the Muslim Brotherhood. There's a worldwide alliance between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Central Intelligence Agency, and that is to destroy civilization. ISIS, of course, the negation of civilization. Today on National Public Radio, they were talking about, they're so sophisticated. This woman, Labat, the CNN editor, always says how sophisticated those ISIS guys are. What were those websites? We do have to ask, National Security Agency, with all the nefarious abilities to shut down websites, how come you allow ISIS websites to get up there so that the poor, duped, alienated young characters in Europe and elsewhere can be brainwashed by ISIS? And then there were 3 or 4 callers today on National Public Radio attacking Islam, and I think this is very, very misleading. Remember, when Turkey was freed from the Sultan, they put Ataturk into power. Ataturk, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, was a modernizing, secular military man interested in national progress.